Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Spot Future Leader Potential, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Rick Lepsinger. My name is Sarah, and I'll be the moderator for today. The webinar will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the questions box. We'll be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or an email if we do run out of time. Rick is president of On Point Consulting. His career has focused on helping organizations and leaders identify and develop leaders, work better virtually, enhance cross-functional team performance, and get from strategy to execution faster. Welcome, Rick, and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Sarah, thank you very much. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Today's topic, we're going to talk about identifying and developing future leaders, and we'll also talk a little bit about 5 specific actions you can take to maximize the return on your investment. You probably all know, and you may be even familiar with this quote, but you know, everyone always says people are our most important asset, but talent really is a key component and a multiplier, and we know that it's worthwhile spending time on really identifying and developing your talent, and you really do get a key return on that when it's done right. The challenge for many organizations is to be able to do it right. So today we're going to talk about 4 primary things. We're going to talk about what you can do to define success, how will you know what good looks like, and then we'll talk about spotting your high potentials and a process or a mechanism to be able to truly identify those who are truly high potential. We'll talk about the ongoing development component, and we'll talk about some specifics for measuring results and the impact. On Point has been working in this area for a number of years. One of our key areas of focus is on identifying and developing future leaders. We also believe we've made a contribution to the thinking and the dialogue around developing leaders. I'm a co-author on 3 books related to this topic: The Art and Science of Competency Modeling, which is identifying the success factors and what good looks like; The Art and Science of Multi-Rater Feedback, 360 Feedback, which is in its 2nd edition, which is really focused on assessing leadership behavior; and a book, my book, co-authored with Gary Uckel, on flexible leadership, which outlines the key competencies required for effective leadership in today's global and competitive world. So you may also be familiar or know that attracting and retaining talent is really one of the most critical issues and the key risks facing organizations today. This quote happens to come from a 2015 study from Hewitt, but it continues on today, and that the top tier organizations tend to outperform others by nearly 19%. If you have an effective leadership team, that really does seem to have a significant impact on organizational performance overall. So let me just check in, given what we know about the importance of identifying high potentials, developing high potentials, focusing on this critical human resource. What % of North American companies do you think believe that they have a strong pipeline? And Sarah's going to open up a polling question for you. And if you would please just select what you think, and we'll just give it a moment here for a few people to respond. And you may be surprised. Okay, okay, Sarah, why don't we close it down? Looks like we got 2/3. All right, so it looks like most of you have around 25 to 50%, which would be a reasonable guess. A few have the higher numbers overall. Only about 25% of you picked the less than 25%. So let's go back to the presentation, Sarah. So again, you may be surprised to find that only 15% of companies surveyed by the HBR said that they have enough successors in the pipeline. And again, it is a little bit surprising. It's a little bit counterintuitive, given how important we know this is, how few companies have really put effort in to making sure they've got a strong pipeline or are confident and comfortable with the pipeline they have. So what we find, and this is kind of the contributing factor, is that a lot of organizations really don't have a structured process. They're either informal or not nearly as robust in their approach to identifying high potentials and the development of that resource. And as a result, what we find is that they end up putting a lot of effort, investing a lot of time and a lot of dollars into employees who actually turn out to not be a good fit, right? Who actually turn out to not be in that high potential pool or who don't succeed, right? So again, what we find is that on average, employees stay at a job, less than 5 years. And in particular, there's a lot of talk now about the impact of millennials entering the workforce, their expectations, how long they stay with a particular employer. And fewer than a third of all organizations have succession plans for all but the top executives. Now again, this becomes particularly critical, especially for that millennial population, although all age groups really desire to feel like there is a development plan for them. It seems to be one of the key criteria for the millennial population in terms of the organizations and what their satisfaction overall and their inclination to stay with an organization. And just beyond that, the cost of replacing employees, especially if you bring people in from the outside, can be twice what their annual salary might be. In addition to those obvious kind of external costs, there are a few hidden costs, or at least costs that are a little less straightforward to calculate. One is just the time and investment involved in hiring and then onboarding. It can take months to find people, and then once you do find them, make the offer, bring them on board. It could take months again to bring them on board. It may be, and again, is that impacting productivity? It could take up to 1 to 2 years to actually bring new employees up to speed where they're really producing at a full level overall. The high turnover also impacts morale, job satisfaction, which in turn impacts customer perception of the organization and the overall perception of the organization. So let's focus on what you can do. 5 specific tips, actions you can do to not only ensure you're identifying your high potential population, but also maximizing and getting the return on the time, effort, money that you invest in doing that work. So in order to illustrate, we'll also talk about a case study, which will be one of our clients, which is AmeriGas. And we'll kind of use them as an example to illustrate these 5 particular tips and steps. You may be familiar with AmeriGas. It's the nation's largest propane company. And one of the things they found is that they really lacked a pipeline for a critical middle manager role, which was what they called the area director. And the area director in the organization, they have about 50 of them in the United States, and they are responsible for 10 or 12 district managers in their area, and 10 or 12 is like an average. In some of the larger areas, they could have much more than that. But the district managers are responsible for day-to-day operations, customer satisfaction, growth, overall profitability, and it's the area director that's ensuring that those things are actually occurring. And AmeriGas found that in that middle level, that many people were just really not prepared. They weren't set up for success and not ready to take on that particular role. And this central role is really critical to the organization's success. And at least that's what the management team felt overall. Again, in that middle, they were the ones that were translating strategy down to the field overall, and they wanted to ensure that they were of high quality, high capability. So overall, what AmeriGas did was they developed a high potential program. And in that program, they were focusing on identifying leaders who had the potential to fill this area director role and to provide this population with opportunities to accelerate their development. So they wanted to both build a strong bench and they wanted to increase the rate with which people were ready overall. So we'll use them as an example to illustrate some of these tips and to bring them to life. And the first tip is around developing a success profile. And for me, this is really central to the success of the whole process overall. What you're trying to do is go beyond the job description and identify what's it take to really succeed in this position. And you're looking at 4 components overall. You're looking at what people know, you're looking at what people have done, you're looking at what they can do in terms of their current capability, but you're also looking at their characteristics in terms of who they are. And what you're doing here is looking at aptitude, which really captures in a great way a big component of potential, because you're looking at their ability to learn and their ability to apply what they learn. So these 4 components make up what we're calling our success profile, which capture what it takes to perform a particular role at a high level. So what you're trying to do here is, again, define what success looks like, and you're trying to take more of a future focus. So it's not just about describing what it takes to perform the job today, but looking a little bit more toward ahead. So you're trying to take into account the overall strategic objectives, where the organization sees itself in 3 or 5 years. You want to take a look at leaders who either previously failed in key roles and looked for patterns. How could they have better prepared? You want to look at leaders who have succeeded in key roles to say, what did they bring to that job overall? You're trying to be as inclusive as possible, including key stakeholders, the direct supervisor of this role, and members of the executive team, and you're trying to be more focused. And although you might have a list of literally dozens and dozens of possible competencies, you're trying to hone in on the critical few. Generally speaking, let's say 7 plus or minus 2 that really capture the critical difference. And sometimes this can be actually challenging to know where and when and how to draw the line. So the competency model, the success profile, goes beyond just the identification of high potentials or to drive the succession planning, succession management system. You can use it both to shape your interviewing system, your interviewing questions overall, to develop training and development goals, use it as part of your performance management system. The key here is that this success profile can help integrate your human resource management systems. So they're all sort of talking to each other, and the same criteria you use for selection also is the driver for training and development and for performance management. One of the things that AmeriGas found is that once they were clear about what it meant to be a highly effective area director, they realized that they needed to move beyond this and start to really think about their pool of district managers, and it started to get them looking at their interviewing and selection system. Because if you were now going to set the bar higher for your area director, it implied that you had to have a richer base of talent at the next level down. And that implied both developing, but also the selection system. So it really is a tool that kind of moves through all of your human resource management systems. So for AmeriGas and the area director profile, we defined what success looked like for the area director role. We outlined and highlighted skills and behavioral traits that were necessary to succeed in the future. Again, we took that future focus and we created a realistic job profile. That's an RJP, realistic job profile. And the idea here was to describe a day in the life or a week in the life to help people who were considering or thought they were interested in the area director role, to help them get a sense of what the expectation was and to determine if they think they would be a good fit. Again, the idea is to increase the likelihood that the people who pursue the role know ahead of time what's it going to take and what the demands are before they get into it and decide that it really isn't for them. So best practices for this phase is to start by identifying the key positions based on the strategic need, and really that was really the driver for AmeriGas. That middle manager role was really the bottleneck in their ability to implement a very demanding and competitive strategy, and that was the focus on that particular role. Some of your organizations may have more than just one role overall. And then to develop the competencies and key behaviors that define success and that will be used to measure success. And here what we're doing is creating a competency model with behavior examples at 3 different points: at the effective level, at the highly effective level, and at the below standard level. So you're trying to be clear about what good looks like, what great looks like, and what below expectations looks like. So there's a shared picture among the members of the organization about what it takes to succeed. And you're defining the competencies with behavior examples so everyone has the same picture. And focusing on the criteria that's most important for future success. And again, in order to keep the competency model more manageable, focusing on the future helps do that. Now, with that in place, you're now ready to assess talent, which is tip number 2. And the success profile is key to that, and the assessment of talent is your next step. What you're trying to do is conduct an in-depth assessment with multiple data points. Whenever possible, using an objective third party is very helpful. Besides the fact that it is more objective, it can also add more rigor and more confidence in the process. And you want to take a look at group level data to be able to identify organizational strengths and gaps, in addition to the individual level data where you're looking at individual opportunities for improvement. So for those of you out there, let's open up a second polling question. I'm just curious, how many of you use assessments in your efforts to identify high potential employees? How many of you actually use assessments? So let's see if we can get up to at least about 75% of you. I'll show you the pattern in a moment. Not too surprising. Okay, Sarah, why don't you close the poll? Okay, again, and not too surprisingly, it's almost 61 to 39%. Most of you do not use assessment. Now again, I'm assuming that you do in fact try to identify high potentials but are not using assessments to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about making the case and why that is value added. And again, I'll be able to use the AmeriGas example because previously they didn't use assessments, and over time they started to better appreciate the value. So Sarah, if we could go back. Thanks very much. So let's start with identifying who your high potentials are, really defining what we mean by high potential. And what we know is that literally 1 out of 7 of your high performers are actually high potentials. And one of the first mistakes a lot of people make is equating and assuming that current high performers are also high potential employees, right? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But your high potential employees are seen as basically twice as valuable and really worth the investment of time in terms of their contribution to the overall organization, especially if you can focus on the retention aspect of it. They're more likely, however, to be uncertain about their career path and maybe even a bit more demanding about where they're going and what's in front of them. We also know that 55% of people who are identified as high potential tend to drop out of development programs, or either they drop out or they were not identified correctly, and 46% who kind of move forward tend to fail to meet the objectives in the new role. So again, what can you do to increase the likelihood that you will actually identify a true high potential employee, and what can you do to increase the likelihood that they will succeed, that they'll stay with it, and that they will succeed overall? So what you're looking for is not just current capability. You're looking for a combination of their ability and current ability, but also their aptitude in terms of ability to learn and apply what they learn. But in addition to that, you're looking for their desire to take on increasing responsibility and their commitment to the organization overall. Part of the process is to get feedback from managers, coworkers, and direct reports to help assess some of this, but you also want to leverage objective tools. Again, feedback from managers and coworkers and direct reports is important, and it is a critical component. And it also has a degree of bias and perception difficulties. But if you take a look at objective tools that focus on future potential and not just current performance, you'll tend to do a better job of overall assessment and identification. So let's talk a little bit about the process that we used at AmeriGas and that we actually use with other clients as well. We start on the left with determining eligibility and fit. And here what we're doing is inviting people to kind of opt in or opt out. And what we do is we basically send people an invitation, let them know that they have an opportunity to be part of a particular program, and are they interested. And what we do is we give them some specific criteria as well as the realistic job profile. So we're basically saying, read the profile. Is this the kind of job that you would be interested in? And we have certain selection criteria on the front end. For instance, in this case, it was willingness to relocate was a pretty important aspect. And if they were not willing to relocate, it was kind of a non-starter. The organization did not want to invest in individuals and then later find out that they weren't willing to move to where they were needed. Another example of a criteria is having no problems in their performance review for at least 3 years. So again, they wanted to get someone who didn't have any issues in terms of performance overall. So here we started with about 179 people, and they kind of self-selected in, and then they moved to the second stage, which is the initial assessment of potential. And this was 85 managers. And we don't do it with the full 749 because we'd like to thin the group down a little bit because it can be time-consuming and cumbersome to do it with too large a group. So now with the 85 managers invited to move on to this next phase, we're now asking their direct manager, their direct supervisor, to complete a potential inventory. Now again, this is more subjective, but we believe it's critical to include the manager's input. Even though it is a bit subjective, this is a critical component to get their ownership and buy-in of the process. Plus, what we learn over time is that their assessment becomes more objective over time. In other words, we're in the third round with AmeriGas, and the quality of the potential inventories has improved dramatically from the first time around because people learn a bit as they go forward. And I'll say a bit more about that in a little bit. So then from this, it kind of narrows down a little bit more, and here it went to 82 candidates, where we do the final assessment of potential, and this is where we start to use the tests. And here we'll use a situational judgment test. This is where we provide a series of scenarios and ask people to select among 5 choices how they would handle it. And the 5 choices are validated and they're put in, they're rated in terms of best to least effective, and people get a score. And they're also asked to complete 2 self-assessments on leadership style and leadership behavior. And these are validated instruments that are also legally defensible. And then we use that and put together a profile of these eligible candidates that move toward the talent review meeting, and the senior leaders review the data and identify the people who will be part of the next cohort for the program. So what we've done is basically try to scale down the pipeline from 749 down to 21 or so managers that would be part of the program overall. So best practices in terms of assessing potential is to focus on an in-depth assessment. You want to use potential inventories, personality tests, and simulations. The more data points you have, the more robust your data is, the more confident you are in your data overall, and the more objective your data can be. It helps to use third parties who can be more objective and add rigor. And you also want to take this data and map the candidate's potential so you can see and compare people to each other, and use the talent review meeting to discuss the candidates and to determine who moves on to the next stage, but also to be able to support your discussions. And I'll say a little bit about this as we go forward and the impact of looking at that data on the decision process. So this is an example of a sample potential inventory. This was custom made for AmeriGas, looking at one of their competencies, which was customer focus. And again, you can see the question is basically rate the extent to which this person has the potential to effectively demonstrate the behaviors that you see above. And you can see very limited, moderate, or exceptional. This data, again, is important because it's the manager's perspective, but we don't just look at this. We also look at the simulation and survey data. This is an example of a situational judgment question, and again, it's one of about 20. Here, the scenario at the top is a position-specific scenario, and it's a typical situation that might be encountered by someone in this area director role. And then the 5 choices below it are 5 good options. The idea here is to provide good options, none that are so easily seen as bad choices, but they're rated in terms of what's the best choice down to the least effective choice. And we ask people how they would handle it, and we put together an overall score for them. And what they get is this chart, and this is what goes to the talent review meeting, where you can see on the left we have the overall average, and we show average scores of the situational judgment and the OPQ, which is the leadership questionnaire that we provide. We give them just the overall situational judgment results, just the occupational personality questionnaire, and then they get the overall potential inventory. So they can see each score individually as well as the overall, and the comments that are put there generally come from the manager based on the potential inventory comments. Here you can see, again, the green are people who seem to make the cut, yellow are people who are sort of in that kind of gray area, mixing my metaphors, and red are people who don't make the cut. Now, in terms of how this is used, initially when we first did this with the senior team, the first year they used the data to some extent, but if they had a favorite person that they really liked, despite what the data said, they would go way down into the red and pick people to be part of the program. And again, when the senior guys do that, you kind of try to make the case for not, but they really want to do it, so they do. What we found, and this happened, that everybody who was selected from the red section did not make it. They did not succeed in the program. The second year, everybody was much more focused on the data and were much more willing to trust the data overall because they saw it as a predictor. Those senior managers who really went to the mat and made the case for an individual were much more hesitant to make the case for an individual whose data did not support it because they saw the results overall. So in the beginning, people may be skeptical, but over time, they start to trust and see that the data really is a predictor of potential and a predictor of success overall. So these individuals who went to the accelerated leadership program where we conducted additional assessments. And here they were in concurrent sessions where they did a coaching role play, an influence role play, usually with a customer or a colleague, a group, leaderless group discussion. They got 360 feedback on their use of the behaviors in the competency, and they were asked to do a presentation to a group to assess their ability to present information in a clear, concise manner and think on their feet. This is what the session looked like. It's kind of a quick overview of the agenda. On the first day, you can see a series of events, and again, there were concurrent sessions where groups were going through these various activities simultaneously, and then in the second day, they went through the next series of activities as well, and at the end of the event, all the data was collected and put together in a final report for each individual and for the group overall. And that takes us to the third tip, which is about reviewing the results overall. So here what you're trying to do is get your talent review board overall to review your top performers, and you share the results with the high potential employees and their supervisors as well. So we would have a call to go over the report and start the process of individual development planning, and we would also do an aggregate report for the senior team. The aggregate report, this is one example of what it could look like. So for each individual on the left, you can see the competencies on the right, and they have a quantitative score for each one. We also can distribute those scores in more of a 4-box to show how people compare with each other, rating performance against potential, current performance against potential overall. And you want to make the case, and this is a way to identify opportunities to close gaps in leadership development. So you're using the aggregate data to say, here are some key development needs. You can also focus on key strengths, identify what's going well, but it allows you to highlight overall group needs and to be able to demonstrate likely outcomes and the costs associated with improper training. So you can, again, it's making sure that you're investing in the skills that will make the greatest difference, right? And you have some data to really support those choices and the allocation of that information. And the fourth tip is around developing a plan for employees. So this is, the assessment is great, but it needs to really be a driver for personal development plans overall. So here we're working with the supervisor of each one of our high potential employees, clarifying their role in the process and helping them understand what they need to do to develop goals, assignments for their high potentials to enhance their development overall, and what they can do to engage them in robust leadership development opportunities that are both on the job, online, and coaching and mentoring. So the idea here is to make it as practical as possible. One of the things that's a key component of the leadership development aspect is action learning, more experiential-based, project-based, where they're really working on a real problem or issue and not just a case or a situation. And it's also critical to link the assessment and the development plan to the performance management process. Again, the performance management process becomes one of the key tools that managers have to ensure that they're focused on their high potential and that they're implementing the plan. And if you make it part of the performance management system, the manager doesn't have to find additional time or more time or new time to work with the high potential. It's just integrated into what they would normally be doing with this individual overall. So the development planning should include on-the-job opportunities, rotational assignments, project teams, educational experiences, e-learning sources, and we would also focus on group development plans to focus on overall needs. What AmeriGas has done each year is that there are, and I'll show you this in a moment, there are 3 live sessions during the course of the year that cover specific leadership topics as well as business topics. And each year, those topics change based on the needs of the organization. So the idea here is to use assessments to put together a development plan. The assessments create awareness, but the whole idea is to say, now what are we going to do to close some of these gaps? You want to make sure that you're reviewing the results with the manager and engage them in the process. The manager plays a critical role in the development of the high potential and helping them realize their potential. Providing resources are key. Again, if you're asking them to focus on their development, you've got to make the investment and allocate the resources. The assignment of critical roles and on-the-job experiences. And a lot of these skills really are learned best on the job overall. You may find that mentoring and pairing them with a mentor is also helpful. The periodic evaluations and coaching sessions, again, built into the performance evaluation, performance management system. Again, this makes it more likely that these kinds of conversations will occur. Also recommending the reassessment of skills 12 or 16 months later, again, focused on the competencies and redoing the 360, and being sure that people understand the long-term career path. Not that you're saying there's a guarantee that this is where you're going, but to say, you know, if you're moving in this path, you'll be in the pool that will be considered for these kinds of opportunities, and that's what they're moving toward, to be considered for, not to be guaranteed the role. So for AmeriGas, we had the 3 skill building sessions, and they set up a platform for online development. So there was intersession work with action learning. They had additional assessments around specific style like influencing skills, decision-making skills, communication skill assessments, on-the-job learning assignments as well. There's a position that was created called the Assistant Area Director, and some of these people were moved into that role to give them a chance to work side by side with an area director. Case studies, training, reading activities are all available to them online. And this is what the program looked like for AmeriGas. On the left is the kickoff event that I already described to you, which is about the assessment and the development report and the feedback call. And then during the year, and you can see here it was spread out February, June, and September, there were live sessions. So in the live sessions, and these changed each year, there was targeted skill building. We've done critical thinking. We've done interviewing skills, presentation skills, conflict management skills, and they change each year. And they also spend time on business-related issues, things like distribution and pricing and customer satisfaction, which are key to their overall performance. Phase 3, in the second live session, would be another round of ongoing leadership development and opportunities for their action learning teams to check in. And then the 4th phase would be the capstone, where they present the results of their action learning teams and their recommendations to solve the problem that they were given. In between all these sessions, there's intersession work, which includes the action learning, but also includes assignments that are online that they're supposed to do in between. And this takes us to the fifth tip, which is around analyzing results overall to really measure the return on investment. So here it's around measuring the rate of improvement in key skills, tracking the rate of retention and promotion among the employees who are in this high potential pool, and calculate the cost savings around recruitment and onboarding. So what you want to do is ensure that you are documenting the process and having a structured review process. You want to monitor the progress of your talent pool with periodic check-ins, and check into the organizational strategy, the extent to which that may be changing, and the impact that it has on the talent pool and the competencies that you're measuring. You also want to measure the number of leadership positions that are filled by members of these cohorts and this talent pool, the retention rate of this talent pool, and their overall levels of satisfaction and commitment, which is their level of engagement in general, and track the results to the bottom line performance. Now in AmeriGas, this was actually more straightforward than it is in some other organizations, because they have extensive tools to track and monitor key performance metrics around customer satisfaction and on the operation side. So measuring changes were much easier for them overall. And some examples of some metrics that you could use, just shooting for the number of development actions that will be completed, the increase in employee engagement and retention, the increase in potential, high potential retention, just focusing on that one category, the increase in high potential leaders, and the increase in the movement of high potential. So there are a number of things you can look at that are relevant for you. In addition, taking a look at pre- and post-training assessments are also good ways to determine if the training is taking and if they are in fact improving in key areas. Collecting feedback from supervisors, direct reports, and peers. Again, the 360 data is a good use for that. Evaluating or leadership execution and operational performance, and then taking a look at retention overall. In addition, you know, many of you, that it costs 4 times as much to recruit and hire someone as it does to retain. So another measure of ROI is to be able to take a look at the extent to which people stay with the company for more than a year. You can assess the total value of personnel costs and determine how much you would spend on recruiting and training new employees. So if measuring the impact on business performance is a little bit more difficult, these kinds of measures are much more accessible, very concrete, and can give you a real solid idea on what the return is on your investment in the identification and development of your high potential population. So the payoff is around having a pool of talent that's ready when you need them, not having to look outside or not having to only look outside. You can minimize your replacement costs around recruitment, selection, and development overall. The ability to retain and attract top talent is key around being an employer of choice, especially if you're, again, for the millennial population, but being an employer of choice is key. And the leadership success greatly outnumber your failures, and you'll find that you're much better able to increase the likelihood of success of the people who you put in key positions overall. In addition to that, we know that it impacts bottom line performance and that it impacts investor and customer confidence. Research from a number of years ago links effective succession management to increased ROI of the business and annual shareholder return overall. So there is some strong correlation between that in general. All right, so everyone, we have a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
All right, great. Thank you, Rick, so much. Rick's contact information is on that screen right there. So if you want to go ahead and get in touch with him. We do have about 10 minutes for that Q&A. So attendees, why don't you go ahead, type your questions into that questions box, and we wait for some of those questions to filter in. We're actually offering a 10% discount off any product at HRDQstore.com. So go ahead and use webinar 10 at checkout. All right, let's see. Our first question is coming from Sue. What's the biggest mistake companies make around high potential identification?
Right. Well, I think there's two. One of them is, I mentioned before, is equating current performance with high potential. Just because someone is a high performer now does not mean they have the potential to continue to learn and grow, take on additional responsibility, and move on to the next level. So that's one key mistake people make. The other is using more subjective criteria, things like tenure, how long they've been with the company, to say, well, gee, we should give them a chance, or do I like the person? If I like them, I get along with them, they've been doing a good job for me, I think they're really good for the organization. So basically, it's not being objective or using objective criteria. And I think those are two key mistakes people tend to make.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Next question is coming from Mark. What are the 2 or 3 best practices or the most important things that make organizations successful with high potential assessment?
Right. For me, the top 3 for me are the success profile. It's critical to define what good looks like and to have that generally shared and agreed to by the key members of the organization. Having a shared picture of what it takes to succeed in a role is critical, and that drives all the other aspects. It drives your criteria for selection. It drives your assessment, evaluation, selection. It drives your ongoing development. It drives the conversation for determining readiness and if somebody should move into a role. So the success profile, I think, is key. The second is the robust assessment, the idea that it's not just a subjective, opinion-driven choice, although you don't want to eliminate the perspective and opinion of the manager. It's still critical, and it needs to be balanced out with the objective data of other people. And I think the third would be the follow-up, the continual monitoring. In other words, are these people that you're identifying, are they being successful? Are they performing to expectation? Are they being promoted? Are they being moved into key organizations? Are we retaining them? And to not just identify and put them in a pool, but to really make sure that you're leveraging the resource and they're achieving the objectives that you intend.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Next question is coming from Devorah. How much backlash at not being selected? We are a small company, less than 100 people. Do you see?
Oh, I mean, people who want to be in the pool but don't make it. Yeah, that can be a problem, and there's certainly going to be some disappointment. So what we recommend is, one is the self-selection piece. So if somebody does all the self-selection, they meet those initial hurdles, and then they get all the way through but don't get chosen for the program. What we do is we share the feedback with the individual. So what we do is make it a development opportunity. And again, the message is, you didn't make it, but here's the feedback. Here's what you're doing well. Here are some of your development opportunities. And then use it to put a development plan in place. With AmeriGas, they let people come back each year if they want to and we've had a couple people come back and who didn't make it year 1, but year 3 they actually made it. So for those who don't, again, to minimize the disappointment is use it as a development opportunity. Make it part of the process to say, it's not like you're a loser. we're going to try to use this as an opportunity to take you further forward.
All right, great, thank you. Moving on to our next question. What is an example of a pre- and post-training assessment? What is the recommended timeline to conduct this?
Well, one example of a pre and post would be a 360 assessment. And again, we'd be recommending the competency-based 360. So on the front end, when people are first entering the program, the 360 is part of the assessment, and they have a baseline in terms of their current performance. But again, they're being measured against behaviors for the next role. So again, for AmeriGas as an example, if you're a district manager, you're being measured against area director behaviors. So in 12 or maybe 18 months to do the 360 assessment again to be able to measure progress. And you can both use that to say, is the training working, right? And what else do we need to do to help either accelerate development or close any additional gaps?
All right, wonderful, thank you. Next question is coming from Tina. For companies who have no succession management processes in place, where might be a good place to start?
Okay, well, again, you probably can guess that I'm going to say, well, the one place to start is to identify the strategically important roles. I think that's key, is to say, you know, what areas do we want to focus on? What roles do we want to focus on? And once you've done that, it's probably not surprising that I'll say the success profile, to be able to identify what good looks like. So once you identify the key role, put the success profile together, and then develop the assessment and get that talent review meeting to get that first cohort, that could take, let's say, 4 to 6 months, depending on the size of the organization and how familiar they are with the process. But in the first 4 to 6 months, you can have the first cohort up and ready. Now, they're not necessarily in the pool, but you've identified who the high potentials are, and you're now ready to focus on the development side. That can be done within 4 to 6 months. We have also had a few organizations that, even out of the initial pool, have started to pull people out who really did very, very well and start to move them into some key positions. Although, again, that doesn't happen quite that often, but sometimes they're in a key position and sort of learning on the job.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Next question is coming from Mary. What can you do when a high-level executive leaders consider someone a high potential who is an exemplary producer but has horrible people skills?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's not too unusual at all. People have their favorites. They have the reason why they want them in there. So again, it's a difficult situation. You try to let the data tell the story, right? That's why you're having the objective data. You let the data tell the story. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not sufficient, and the senior exec wants his or her person in there. So what we found is, you just need to move with that, right? Now, again, you try to make the case, and if they don't understand or you can't influence them, then you might have to move the person in. What we find, however, is that it's not a terrible thing from a learning standpoint, because we find that if people go outside the, like the color coding, if they go into the red zone where people who are clearly don't have the potential to succeed, and they pull someone out of that group and try to force them into the program, they generally don't succeed. The next time around, it's much more difficult to make a case for somebody whose numbers don't add up, no matter how much you like them, right? So in our experience, the senior execs learn over time, and over time, nobody's going to take the risk of putting somebody up who fails. And you only need 1 or 2 experiences of promoting somebody who you really like and having them fail. You start to lose credibility. So pretty soon, it starts to happen much less frequently. And again, if you have a good, robust assessment process, you can be very confident that the numbers will accurately predict who has potential.
All right, thank you, Rick. And looks like we have time just for one more question, and that one is coming from Mike, and he wants to know, if a company does not have a succession management plan in place, realistically, how long would it take to implement one, and what steps need to be taken?
Yeah, I think for that, I mean, again, it goes back to, let's say, the 4 to 6 months. You know, it's identify the strategic position, put the succession, the success profile in place, do the assessment, identify that first cohort, that first pool of people that'll start to move through the development portion. That could take 4 to 6 months to get to saying, here's our key pool. And then the development portion, most organizations do it over the course of a year because they're trying to do on-the-job development as well as classroom training and online training as well. So the identification of the pool, 4 to 6 months. The development piece could be another year overall.
All right, great. Thank you. Those are some great questions. And if we didn't get, I am going to go ahead and scroll up and see if we missed any of questions, and we'll actually send those over to Rick, and then he'll answer those, and then we'll actually be sending those out next week with those responses. So, Rick, would you just like to add any final thoughts before I wrap up then?
No, I just want to thank everyone for showing up, and also, if you like, we have a lot of information on our website, onpointconsultingllc.com. In our blog, we write on this topic quite a bit. It's all free resources for your use and perusal, so I encourage you to take a look. And again, thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks again, Rick. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today, so we appreciate your time, and we hope you found the webinar informative. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.